I'm giving a talk on Islam, but I did want to say I want to make sure you know that I'm not an expert on Islam. Okay, I want to make sure I say that from the outset. You know, I've taken multiple classes on Islam at SMU, at DTS. I've read the Quran in depth. I've done a lot with the Quran. You're going to get a lot of quotes from the Quran tonight.
Much more of an expert than any of us on it.
Well, I've engaged in Muslim evangelism. When I came to Christ about 12 years ago, I called them the unbeliever people of the book, or you know, people of the book, people of a scripture. Jews, Muslims, Mormons, and Jehovah's Witnesses. God just kept bringing in my path, and I enjoyed talking to them. Of course, I enjoyed talking to atheists and things as well. But I really enjoyed talking to people who had this foundation of they believe the Bible in some sense. You know, the Bible is the Word of God, and just being able to engage them about what I think is central, which is who is Jesus, and discussing Jesus with them. So I've been doing that, you know, for about 12 years, getting in these dialogues. I think to be an expert, I think you need to learn Arabic as a bare minimum, because as I'll share, Muslims actually believe that the Quran is only fully inspired in Arabic, in the original language. So I've never actually read the true Quran. I've just only read a paraphrase of the Quran according to Muslims. And I think it's going to take at least a decade of just intense study to really, I mean, you're talking about 1,400 years of history and 1.5 billion Muslims, 3 different Sunni, Shiite, Sufi, you know, just there's just so much. So I just want to say that. I'm prefacing that so that way if I say I don't know a lot to questions you ask, it's because I'm not an expert. See, I can just say that I'm a lay person that's very interested in Islam and sharing Christ with Muslims and befriending them. And I have a lot of good friends that are Muslims, and I really admire and respect their passion. I respect the religion of Islam. I was going to open with this clip, and I realized it was 10 minutes. I thought it was 5 minutes. So I'm only going to show about 4 or 5 minutes of it, but you'll get I think the gist of it and enjoy the entertaining value of it. But it's not just that it's entertaining. I also want you to see something that Reza Aslan, who's a Muslim scholar who wrote a book about Jesus. Y'all hear about that book called Zealot? Yep. This is a really, this video went viral because this Fox News reporter asked these pretty ridiculous questions to Reza Aslan, but it's funny on both sides. But what I really what I appreciate about the video is what Reza Aslan says very strongly about Jesus' death, and that's something that is a big point that I want to make about Islam. And so let me just show this clip, and we'll get the lights down, and I'll just show it until he says what I want him to say, and then we'll cut it off, even though it's really good.
The faith of his forefathers, Islam. He has now written a book about Jesus. The book has become controversial as it calls into question some of the core tenets of Christianity. The book is called Zealot, The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth. And Reza joins me now from Los Angeles. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this is an interesting book. Now, I want to clarify, you're a Muslim, so why did you write a book about the founder of Christianity?
Well, to be clear, I am a scholar of religions with 4 degrees, including one in the New Testament, and fluency in Biblical Greek, who has been studying the origins of Christianity for 2 decades, who also just happens to be a Muslim. So it's not that I'm just some Muslim writing about Jesus. I am an expert with a PhD in the history of religions. But I've been obsessed with Jesus.
It still begs the question, why would you be interested in the founder of Christianity?
Because it's my job as an academic. I am a professor of religion, including the New Testament. That's what I do for a living, actually. So, I mean, it would be like asking a Christian why they would write a book about, you know, Islam. I'm not sure about that. But honestly, I've been obsessed with Jesus for really 20 years. I've been studying his life and his work and the origins of Christianity, both in an academic environment and at a personal level for about 2 decades. And just to be clear, this is not some attack on Christianity. My mother is a Christian. My wife is a Christian. My brother-in-law is an evangelical pastor. Anyone who thinks that this book is an attack on Christianity has not read it yet.
But I want to read you some quotes from some people who are criticizing you. One from John Dickerson, who has written an op-ed piece on FoxNews.com. He says, it's not a historian's report on Jesus. Is it an educated Muslim's opinion about Jesus? He says its conclusions are long-held Islamic claims, namely that Jesus was a zealous prophet, type who didn't claim to be God.
Well, that's actually not what Islam claims about Jesus. My book about Jesus overturns pretty much everything that Islam also thinks about Jesus as well. And to be clear, I just want to emphasize this one more time. I am a historian. I am a PhD in the history of religions. This isn't a Muslim opinion. This is an academic work of history, not about the Christ or about Christianity for that matter. It's about a historical man who walked the earth 2,000 years ago in a land that the Romans called Palestine.
How are your findings different from what Islam actually believes about Jesus?
Well, Islam doesn't believe that Jesus was crucified, first of all. Islam believes in the virgin birth. I mean, Jesus was most definitely crucified, and my book does question the historicity of the virgin birth. So again, I mean, I know that we've mentioned this 3 times now. I'm not sure what my faith happens to do with my 20 years of academic study.
This was so funny about it. You should go watch the whole thing. It continues that way. I think he says he has a PhD 10 more times. Everybody got on the reporter. She is asking pretty ridiculous questions, there's no doubt. But I mean, he is sitting there saying he has a PhD about 20 times. So, you know, it was kind of on both sides. But she's not getting it. Yeah, she's not. But I thought he was a little overly defensive, I thought. But I thought the questions were definitely ridiculous, too. It was both sides for sure. But when he said Jesus was most definitely crucified, I think, you know, as I'll show you in the Quran, it says Jesus was not crucified. And Reza Aslan says he's still a Muslim. So if I ever got to meet him, that would be my simple law of non-contradiction question to him. Reza, how can you believe that the Quran is the perfect, uncreated Word of God, and it says Jesus is not crucified, and then say that he was most definitely crucified? Please explain that to me. Help me understand that. I mean, that's what I think is fascinating about that. But I agree with Reza Aslan that Jesus was crucified. And I think most would say that. And so that's just one of the main points, and I thought y'all enjoy that. Y'all can watch the rest of that, look that up on YouTube. I thought I'd just start out with kind of a brief history of Islam, just real few just origin type facts, so that way, in case some of you have no experience with Islam at all, I just thought I'd bring in a few key facts. Of course, Islam would go back to Muhammad, born around AD 570, so this is about 540 years after Jesus was crucified. Muhammad is born in Mecca. The key events surrounding all this is what happened to Muhammad in a cave, that he received these revelations from the angel Gabriel. And this is the same angel Gabriel who appeared to Daniel in 6th century Babylon, who appeared to Mary to announce, according to Muslims, this is the same angel Gabriel that's in our Hebrew and New Testament scriptures. And so he received these revelations, and these revelations ended up being written down in what is the Quran. So the Quran is basically the written form of these revelations that were given to Muhammad over this period, various different revelations. And Gabriel, one of the things he said, the first thing he said to Muhammad was recite. And that's what Quran means in Arabic, is recite, recite. And so he was given this revelation, and ultimately it got written down in the Quran. Debate on exactly when the Quran was written and got written, but the point is that that's where the Quran comes from. It's a written form of this revelation given to Muhammad. Another key, Muhammad claims, Islam claims that the Quran is the final revelation. So just like we see the New Testament as the final revelation in Jesus, they believe, no, there's a third. There's Moses with the law, there's Jesus with the gospel, and then there's the Quran with Muhammad. So this is the final revelation that just is carrying on from going all the way back to Abraham. Okay? And just to bring up, AD 62 is another huge date as well that you should know, because this is when Muhammad took the few followers he had. He didn't have that many followers, but he took a few of the followers and he went to Medina from Mecca, and this is basically when Muslims divide their calendar. So just in the same way the West, we divide our calendar where? The birth of Christ, right? They divide their calendar in our calendar AD 62. So AD 62 for them is year one, right? This is, you know, in the 600s for us, it's the first century for them. Okay? So in Islam, they divide their calendar at AD 62 in this event of Muhammad going from Mecca to Medina. And Islam spread very fast. So if you just briefly say that they, spread and conquered nations within 30, 40 years. They had conquered most of Syria, Iraq, Persia, Egypt, parts of Europe, North Africa, and Central Asia. And of course, has continued spreading throughout the world to today. 1.5 billion adherents to Islam today. How many people live on the earth, do you know? 7 billion. You should watch that video. Y'all seen that video? I think it's on. It's a National Geographic thing. It goes through all these different things about 7 billion people. It's really cool. You should look it up. I don't know what it's called. That's just some basic facts, some key facts about Islam. Let me give you a few beliefs as well that I think are fundamental. Of course, the 5 pillars of Islam are fundamental to any faithful Muslim. In fact, what's known as the Shahada, this statement right here is what a Muslim's going to say when he becomes a Muslim. This is basically the conversion testimony. They will say, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger." This is what, if you follow the news, in that mall, and where was that? With the shooting? Yeah, at the shooting, if you read the news on that, some of the guys who were in there and took people hostage, they actually were letting people who were Muslims leave, and one of the things that they would do is make them say this, that would be a test, but they'd also ask them trivia questions about Islam, and then they'd let them out.
But not all Muslims, because there was one woman and her daughter who were able to recite the Quran to the attackers, but because she didn't have a head covering, even though she knew the Quran,
Yeah.
she was out, they still shot her.
Yeah. So this is basically the essential. This is like for Christians, Jesus is Lord, and this is the ultimate. If you're a Muslim, you're going to say this. They pray 5 times a day. This is just the Arabic word for prayer. You're well aware of that. Almsgiving, they give a certain percentage of their money to the mosque, to the poor, to help. This is required in Islam. Ramadan is the month of fasting. If you have Muslim friends, you know that they fast during the day, during Ramadan for that month. And then the Muslims are not necessarily required, there's exceptions, but to go to Mecca, to have a pilgrimage to Mecca if they can. And in fact, you didn't know Mecca, unless you're Muslim, you can't even enter Mecca. Mecca is only a place for Muslims. So you're required to go to Mecca at least once in your life, and you go as often as you can, of course, if you have the means.
So how do they, test people going into Mecca if they're Muslims? Do they require you to recite stuff? Or?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'd have to look into that, but I would assume they have some key things that they ask them to make sure that they are, serious about Islam. I'm sure they have some key tests. That's a good question, though. I'd like to look into that. And then, of course, that just like with the Christian with the Bible, you cannot talk about a Muslim's life without the Quran. The Quran, according to the Muslim, is the perfect, uncreated word of the Creator. It existed from all eternity. It is the perfect word and brought into writing and in its original language. They believe God, Allah, speaks Arabic in heaven. So this is the equivalent to Christians saying, John 1:14, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. They believe the Word became writing. The Word became a book. And so that would be kind of a parallel between Islam and Christianity. So that's just a few basics I wanted to give you, and then I want to talk about some positives of Islam, because we need to hear, I think we hear a lot of negative in the news, and we hear a lot of negatives. We need to hear some positives first before I get into what I consider the key problems with Islam, because there's a lot of things I think we can learn from our Muslim neighbors, as we have very good examples of this in the New Testament. I think Acts 17 is our key place. When Paul goes to Athens and he sees all the idolatry, it says he got ticked off in his spirit. He was pissed. He was mad about the idolaters. But you know what he said to the philosophers when he started talking to them? He said, "You idolaters, you're going to go to hell for having these idols." No, he didn't say that, did he? He said, "I see you are very religious." I see, it was a compliment. Scholars say that the way that Greek word and what Paul's saying there, he's saying it in a winsome, charismatic way. I see y'all are very religious. That's a good thing. It's good to want to worship because you were made to worship. In fact, I even see this altar over here that says "to an unknown God." And now who this unknown God is, you don't even know who he is, but I'm here to proclaim him to you. Now let me tell you about him. He became a man. His name's Jesus. There's going to be a judgment. You know, he rose again from the dead. So I think we have this example in Paul and in many faithful followers of Christ throughout church history. So just a few positives of Islam, things that we can definitely respect, things that if we believe all truth is God's truth, which I think we should, we can see these truths in Islam. It's monotheistic. Islam believes in one God. Judaism, Islam, Christianity, we all believe that there is absolutely one God. And in fact, everyone here, of course, is fans of William Lane Craig. If you look at the first three arguments that William Lane Craig gives in his debates, you know, the Kalam cosmological argument, the fine-tuning argument, the moral argument, the Muslim apologist will give those same arguments if he were to debate with an atheist. Same arguments. He could give the same exact arguments to demonstrate Allah, to demonstrate the God, the uncreated creator of the universe. It's only when you get to Jesus, then you get definitely a dividing line. But monotheism, the God of Plato and Aristotle, the God of the philosophers, the God of Islam, the God of Jews, the God of Christianity, a lot of these arguments just demonstrate that, right? It's Jesus that divides us and shows Christianity to be the distinguishing true religion. And that's why he gets to the resurrection always in the debates. But look at what they actually, and this is all from the Quran. These are surahs. They call them, instead of chapter, well, it just means chapter in Arabic, but they call them surahs. There's 114 surahs in the Quran. And so that's what these citations are. Jesus was virgin born. He was virgin born. Just, you heard Reza Aslan saying, I challenge, I don't believe that.
Where in the Bible does it say that?
Where in the Bible say he was virgin born?
Yeah.
In Matthew 1 and in Luke 1. It says that Matthew specifically cites Isaiah 7:14 as prophecy, that the virgin will be with child and give birth to a son, and he will be called Emmanuel, God with us. And then it talks about how the Holy Spirit came upon Mary. And Joseph, had a problem with that because he's like, he knew where babies came from. And so God was gracious to Joseph and appeared to him in a dream with an angel and said, hey, this child's born of God. It's born of the Holy Spirit. Don't worry. Love your wife. Take care of her. Take care of the child. But yeah, in Luke 1 and Matthew 1, but I can give you the exact references afterwards. But in the Quran, they believe Jesus was virgin born. They believe he was sinless. They believe he was the Messiah, a prophet. He healed the blind. He cleansed the leper. He raised the dead. He had disciples. And he ultimately ascended into heaven. And he will actually return one day to judge to destroy the Antichrist and judge the world at the end of the world. That's what Muslims believe about Jesus. I mean, that does sound familiar, doesn't it? I mean, I would say it's just, Muhammad is taking quite a bit from what he knew, and it made its way into the Quran. But, I mean, if you just think about that, if you think about the fact that there are 1.5 billion Muslims on the earth today, there are 2.5 billion Christians of Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, Protestant, that's 4 billion out of the 7 billion that believe these things about Jesus of Nazareth. And that's just amazing in itself, isn't it?
How do they believe he died?
Well, I'm going to get into that. That's why I skipped that part. See, they believe he was just taken to heaven. They missed the core stuff about Jesus, the core, what makes Christianity, the New Testament, Christ and him crucified and risen again. They miss this. They miss that, and that's crucial, and that's why this isn't enough. You can't just believe this about Jesus and be okay. But I think what they do say about Jesus is quite amazing, because we don't have this in Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism. This isn't anywhere else, but we have in Islam. We have these agreements, and this is why, if you've ever talked to people in missions in Muslim countries, there's actually a method called the camel method, which is actually they teach you how to go through the Quran and go through these verses about Jesus with the Muslim, and then you take them to the New Testament. So you basically build a bridge with the Quran with basically verses like this, and that's what the camel method is. What else can we learn? The holiness. I mean, the submission to God for Muslims, the anti-worldliness, even the modesty among women, right? I mean, some of the churches today looks like people going clubbing, right? I mean, the modesty in the Muslim world is something to respect. Emphasis on family. You know, the have big families, and family is so important. Now, it can go too far, right? I mean, you've heard about news stories on that, but emphasis on the family. There's a lot of valuable things that we can learn from Muslims in that. I think reverence for the scriptures. This is a big one. Did you know Muslims never put the Quran on the ground? They never touch anything to it that's unclean, that's considered unclean. What was that other one? Oh, everybody stands when the Quran is recited. Everybody stands. You know, I was thinking about when I was driving here. You know, I have about 3 Bibles in my truck, and I can hear it hitting the doors. I mean, see, I can learn something from the Muslims on this. I mean, we should respect the Bible. We need to put it in a high place, and we need to have respect for our scriptures.
Is the same with Quran that are in Arabic and Quran that are translated into other languages?
Another good question. I would think so. That from what I've learned, I think it's no matter what, even if it's translated. I think they hold it in such reverence. They would just say that it's ultimately a paraphrase, not even they won't even consider it a translation. And then I've been learning about this recently, just on my own studies, and I thought it was fascinating, so I thought I'd share this. There was a golden age of Islam. Okay, there was a golden age of Islam, and it's known as really 8th through 11th century, but 8 through the 13th century was what's called the Abbasid Empire. And let me just tell you a few things about what happened during this time. It was during the Middle Ages. In Europe, in the West, in the Christian world, this is when the Dark Ages were happening, what they call the Dark Ages. But in the Muslim world, this is where human civilization, this is where the advancement of knowledge was happening. This was where, you know, things in philosophy and science was just skyrocketing at this time. This was the center of the world. That's okay. Philosophy, for example, they discovered Aristotle. A lot of people think it was Aristotle, the rediscovery of Aristotle among the Muslims at this time. They translated Aristotle into Arabic, and this caused this renaissance, in a sense, of thinking, of logic, of arguments for the existence of God. All these things were happening with philosophy. And in fact, that's how Christian Europe rediscovered Aristotle and Plato and a lot of them. It was through the Muslims. The Muslims translated it into Arabic, and then the Christians got it and translated it back into Latin. And this is how Thomas Aquinas discovered Aristotle. And he's the one that took Aristotle and baptized Aristotle with Christianity, just as Augustine baptized Plato. But for a long time, for almost 800 years, I mean, these philosophers had been lost in the Christian world, but the Muslims rediscovered them, and that's how it got back into the Christian world. And then we had in the West, they had the Renaissance around the 15th and 16th century. Science, the use of the scientific method was huge at this time. Math, we call it Arabic numerals. Why do we call it Arabic numerals? It's because of this time. Trigonometry and algebra was brought to its kind of completion of still the way it's done today. In fact, algebra, the word algebra is a Islamic name. I can't even pronounce it, but it basically is it's a form of an actual Islamic name of a person who mastered algebra. Astronomy, most stars, if you study the stars and their names, most stars that have been named are Arabic names because of this time. Physics, medicine, art, architecture, all this was happening, and this was in Baghdad. I mean, this was in Baghdad, right? We don't think of Baghdad as the intellectual center of the world today, do we? But Baghdad was at this time. If you think about 15th century Egypt at the time of Moses, you think about 6th century Babylon BC with where Daniel was. You think about 5th century Athens with Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. And you think about 1st century Rome, really 1st century Jerusalem and Nazareth where Jesus was. But But first century Rome was like the New York City of that time, and you can go on and on and on. In the Middle Ages, this is where the center of human civilization was. This is where the advancement of knowledge was taking on such heights. And so much was happening, but sadly, there was a decline. Islam had a decline in this advancement, and it was all, there's other factors too, but most point mainly to this guy who Muslims even today consider probably the greatest thinker after Muhammad, and it was this guy named Al-Ghazali. And he was around the 11th century, and what Al-Ghazali did is he rejected Aristotle and philosophy and reason and science, and he looked at those things and thought they were even of the devil. I mean, these are not what we should be doing. And so he kind of reformed Islam and said, let's get back to studying the Quran. Let's get back to the 5 pillars and praying and worshiping and serving in our, going back to the origins of Islam.
This isn't the same Al-Ghazali that went with Craig.
Oh yeah, it's the same guy.
So he provides philosophical arguments even though he doesn't like philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things, you know, it gets back to, he's using reason, he's using all these things, but he ultimately is saying, but just study the Quran, you know. And so arguments for the existence of God was big. You know, that was he looked at that as a good thing because it was about God. But anything outside, like the natural world, he would say, let's study. He wrote books with titles that were basically like completely anti-science, anti-this. You can Wikipedia it and look up his list of books that he wrote. I don't even know if we still have most of them. I'm sure we have a lot of them. He was, many consider him the Thomas Aquinas of Islam, but if you know Thomas Aquinas, he did the opposite. Thomas Aquinas took science and philosophy and wedded and baptized them into Christianity. He believed, you know, God wrote 2 books. He wrote the Bible and he wrote creation, and we should study both. We're gonna learn both when we do that. Al-Ghazali did the opposite. He said, no, let's stick with just the book. Let's stick with the Quran. Let's stick with the things of God, the things of our faith. And interestingly, you know, many people say that Islam, as a result of this, since the 13th century, Islam has basically stayed in that same state. They're still in that state of the Middle Ages. And that's why you see such violence in that world. That's why you see all these things. And that's why you see maybe a reformation happening right now with the younger generation that's rising up and saying, no, we want something different because of all the social media that they've been given for the first time in the last 30 years to see what the rest of the world is like and learn things from YouTube and from Twitter and Facebook and all these things. They've been able to see this and they're like, we don't want this, and so they're overthrowing it. And so Islam is going through kind of what happened in the Protestant Reformation just 500 years ago. So it's very, very interesting, and there's a lot of things written about that by people much smarter than me, but it's interesting when you look at that history. So positives, some good positives, definitely some things that we can respect and learn from Islam. Any questions?
I mean, you say that they're being violent because they're stuck in the Middle Ages, but don't you
Not all. I'm not saying all. I'm just saying.
I understand that, but you're just saying it just because of religious reasons. But don't you think there's other reasons too, like political reasons?
Oh yeah. I'm not saying it's only that. I'm just saying the kind of things like sawing people's head off, you know, these kind of things you don't see happening here. And I would say we still do wicked stuff. We still do all these things. But I'm saying the kind of things that they were doing in the Middle Ages is still happening in that world.
People's head off, that's one thing, but shooting people in schools and government buildings, that's another thing too.
Right. No, I agree. We just have more sophisticated weapons to do it with, I think. We're still, there's still wickedness here, no doubt. But there is that revolution that's happening that we see in Egypt and Syria and Iran and most of these places with the young people and what they're doing, and there's something to that. And a lot of people think it's this kind of reformation that's happening that's never really happened in Islam. But that's what I've. Anything else on that? And so before I just share a little bit about the problems that I see with Islam, let me first explain just why Christianity and Islam are irreconcilable. And this is, when I say this, you know, you need to realize Orthodox, passionate Muslims aren't going to be pluralist. All right, they're not postmodern. They're just like the Orthodox Christian, and they believe that There is one absolute truth, and they are defending it, all right? So they're not offended by this. They agree that Islam and Christianity are irreconcilable, okay? And I'll show you why, a key reason, and it would be Jesus. Jesus, I think, who he is, when you ask the question, who is Jesus, the answer you get from the Muslim, the answer you get from a Christian, that is, I think, the ultimate dividing line of, there are other things too, but I think that's the one I think we should focus on. That's the biggest one. Did everybody see the movie Life of Pi? Anybody see that? I mean, it was such a good movie, but gosh, it drove me nuts because the kid, I mean, he says that he becomes a Jew, he loves Jesus, and he loves the forgiveness of Jesus, so he becomes a Christian, and he loves Islam, so he goes to the mosque, and he's praying at the mosque. And it's the same thing with like Reza Aslan. It's like, this doesn't make sense. You can't go to church and say Jesus is the Son of God, and then go to the mosque and say Jesus is not the Son of God. You just can't do that. I mean, that makes no sense. It's like saying I don't exist. I mean, you can't do that. Aristotle taught us that. You cannot do that. And so this is one of the things. Is Jesus the Son of God or is he not the Son of God? This is from the Quran, Surah 18. It says, and to warn those who say Allah has taken a son, they have no knowledge of it, nor had their fathers. Grave is the word that comes out of their mouths. They speak not except a lie. I picked that one because it says it's a lie that Allah has had a son, because the New Testament says the very opposite about what is a lie. But there's many surahs that say this. In fact, Jesus himself in the Quran says, Allah actually asked Jesus, did you tell people that you're the Son of God? Did you go around and tell people that? And Jesus says, no, I did not say that. I did not say that. And 1 John 5:10 says, I think this is to me, direct contradictory statements. Anyone who believes in the Son of God has this testimony in his heart. Anyone who does not believe God has made him out to be a liar, because he has not believed the testimony God has given about his Son. Now, I find this fascinating, that according to the Quran and in other places, this idea of shirk, which is basically putting someone on par with Allah, putting anyone on par with Allah and worshiping them too, that is like the ultimate sin of Islam. Shirk. It's the ultimate sin. And so to put Jesus up there and do that and to call him the Son of God, that's the ultimate sin of Islam, the ultimate sin of the Quran. You cannot do that. But the ultimate sin of the New Testament is to reject that Jesus is the Son of God. So, I mean, it's quite fascinating to me, and I don't think it's by accident, that the New Testament basically says you have to believe Jesus is the Son of God or you cannot be saved. And the Quran says you have to reject that Jesus is the Son of God or you cannot be saved. That's quite fascinating, don't you think? I think those are directly opposed. So you have to, either both are wrong, right, and the atheists are right or something, or one's right and one's wrong. They can't both be right, right? They can't both be right. Let's get to the problems of Islam. I think first of all, before I say that, you'll start reading all that. Stop that. Early Christian apologetics. This is what's interesting. Do you know Islam, remember, arose around the 7th century? There were Christians there. There were Christians around, all right? And some of the Christians, especially by the 8th century, some of the well-known early church fathers, they started responding to the Muslims. And they started getting into evangelistic discussions. And in fact, I brought John of Damascus. This guy, he lived in the 8th century. He was a strong Christian. This is from the Nicene and post-Nicene Fathers, that 38-volume series of early church fathers. I've brought some of those before to show y'all. So there's 30. You can get this for $200. $200. You can read it for free on ccel.org. For free. So go home tonight and start reading. 38 volumes. But John of Damascus, he basically gives us, I mean, the arguments that are being made from the Muslim side and from the Christian side, we get from John of Damascus back in the 8th century. Pretty much all the big Muslim apologetics against Christians and Christian apologetics against Muslims, it's already being discussed back here in the 8th century. So it's fascinating. I was reading a lot of what they were saying, and he actually gave me some new arguments that I had never heard before that I thought were really interesting, and so I thought I'd share some of those things. So one of the things that go really back to the origin, one of the biggest things, and it's still true today, is a misunderstanding of what Christians mean by the Trinity, of what we're saying when we say God is one and yet three. He is one being and yet three in persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. eternally distinct, but all fully God, but not three gods, but one God. What we mean, what we say, what we mean when we say that, and what the Quran understood, what Muhammad probably understood, I think goes back to their original misunderstanding of the Trinity with Muslims, which I think still goes on today. And this goes back to a verse in the Quran in Surah 5 where God is God is talking about Jesus, and he says, then God will say, Jesus, son of Mary, did you ever, God is, this is actually that example I was telling you about where God asked Jesus, did you say these things? He says, God will say, Jesus, son of Mary, did you ever say to mankind, worship me and my mother as gods besides God? And then he goes on and says, no, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. But here's what's interesting. Look at the misunderstanding of the Christian teaching of the Trinity. That Mary would be a god beside Jesus and beside. And what's very interesting about this is there was a heretical group, a heretical Christian group that Muhammad probably encountered, and they were called the Ebionites, and they did put Mary in this exalted position. All right, and they were heretics, and they went off. There are no Ebionites today, okay? And then this got into the Quran as the understanding of the Trinity, that Mary was in some sense a part of the Trinity. And so this misunderstanding of the Trinity goes all the way back to Muhammad and his interaction with Christians that he met. And I always think, how history would have been different if Muhammad had met maybe John of Damascus. Well, he couldn't have met John because he was 100 years later, but if he had met one of these Christians who actually explain the Trinity in an orthodox, correct way. Of course, we all consider this heresy. I agree with that this is heresy. We don't believe Mary is a part of the Trinity. Definitely not. So you see in the very Quran that the understanding of the Trinity is not the Christian definition of the Trinity. Do you see that? And so this is, I think, a big thing for Christians. If you are going to have good conversations with Muslims, you have to be able to explain the Trinity in the right way, because that is a misunderstanding. They think it's three gods. They think it's polytheism. So you have to explain how it's one God and yet three persons, but not three gods. And Mary is definitely not a part of that. It's a key thing. One person said that Muslim evangelism is a crash course in Christian doctrine, because you have to understand the Trinity, you need to understand the Incarnation, you need to understand Jesus' hypostatic union, that he is one God. I mean, he is fully God and fully man, one person with two natures, divine and human. You need to be able to explain those things, or it's just not going to make sense to a Muslim background believer. So this is the first one. The John the Baptist one was new. This is one of the ones that I found that John the Damascus was using. He would say, as I said before, Muhammad taught that, and the Quran teaches that the prophets going all the way back to Abraham, all the prophets that we're familiar with in the Old Testament and the New Testament, these are all leading up to Muhammad. And so John the Baptist was one of those prophets. And so the Christians would say to the Muslims, they would say, okay, John the Baptist was a great prophet. What made him great? What did he do? And they'd say, well, I guess he pointed to Jesus. And they'd say, exactly, he pointed to Jesus, so why didn't he point to Muhammad? Why didn't John the Baptist mention Muhammad? Why did he only point to Jesus? That was one of the arguments, that was one of the things they would say. Just an interesting 8th century Christian argument. A similar kind of thing is the prophecies in the Old Testament. They would say, look at the prophecy in the Old Testament. We see the New Testament saying that Jesus fulfilled all these. Where are the prophecies left for Muhammad? Where is a prophecy for the final revealer of the revelation? Right? Why isn't there any left for Muhammad? That was another one of their arguments. Blaise Pascal said, difference between Jesus Christ and Muhammad: Muhammad not foretold, Jesus Christ foretold. He keeps things succinct. And then the last one, they would say Muhammad performed no miracles, which isn't really, the worst, that's not like any type of death blow argument or anything. But when you think about Jesus, and like what I showed, I mean, he's raising the dead, he's healing the sick, he's healing the blind, he's doing all these amazing feats. But it's interesting, Muhammad performed no miracles. But Muslims do say, and I don't know where this began, but I don't know if this is, I don't think it's in the Quran, but Muslims I know at least today, many I've talked to, will say Muhammad's great miracle is the Quran. The Quran is the miracle. This is the great miracle that proves the truth of Islam. But here's a response to that I think needs to be thought about. if it is only true in the original, only inspired in the original Arabic, and this Arabic of the Quran is an ancient Arabic. It's kind of like Shakespearean English, right? I mean, it's difficult. I mean, it's not like, you know, even a person who speaks Arabic today probably can't pick it up and just read it. I mean, it's kind of a difficult Arabic because it's so ancient, right? Like Shakespearean English, we can't just pick that up, and you know, you have to take a course at UTD to learn that language. And so if that's the case, and Muhammad was a prophet to the world, then why so, I mean, who's going to be able to read it? Only people who know this language Arabic, you see? Only people who understand Arabic, the original language of Arabic, would be able to read the final revelation to man. And so it's just something to think about, because when you think about the Bible, we believe that only in the original autographs was it fully inspired, inerrant, infallible, all those things. But we believe that the true essence of the Word of God, the inspired Word of God, does continue in the translations and in the 5,000 translations, different languages that have come around today.
That wasn't always the case, though. But, well, we had a Latin translation, and that was the only translation that was allowed for a long time.
Yeah. The Vulgate lasted for 1,000 years.
Does that mean analog to almost like a parallel between Islamic history and Christian history?
It's a little different because none of the Christians ever said Latin was the only way to read it in the inspired way. And they never said it with the Greek and the Hebrew either. They always said, and just like we say today, you should go back to the original language because it's more important, it's easier to read. You know, you get to read the very words of Jesus, the very words of Paul, and that. So it's better to go back to the original language, but we don't say that only in the original language. You got to go learn Koine Greek and Hebrew to be able to read the perfect Word of God. But Muslims say you have to learn Arabic. Arabic is the only way to fully understand that.
Could it be seen as like a parallel to puritanical thinking? Like, Puritans believed that whether or not you were one of the chosen to go to heaven was like predetermined. So like, couldn't Muslims argue that like, the people who were meant to be brought to the Quran like are?
They could, but the fact is there's 1.5 billion Muslims on the planet, and most of them don't know Arabic. I think Arabic. I think only 15. I think the last statistics I saw was 15 to 20% of those Muslims are Arab. So.
But they learn Arabic. Muslims here learn Arabic.
Yeah, to recite, but I'm just saying to be able to read it. I mean, they learn it just like Jews grow up learning, the Shema in Hebrew, but they don't really. To be able to sit down and read the Quran, to be able to just read straight through, I don't think very many at all know Arabic in that way. Because there's a big difference just being able to recite it and to be able to actually read it. But it's just, like I said, this isn't it's just something to think about. If it's a book for the world. And just a few other things. These are more ancillary, but I thought I'd throw them out because this is a lot in the news with all the stuff about the martyrdom and having 72 virgins. It never says 72 virgins in the Quran, but this is one of the examples, and there's many others, but this is straight from 38:48 of what heaven is going to look like. The Islamic view. It says, "The righteous shall return to a blessed retreat, the gardens of Eden, whose gates shall open wide to receive them. Reclining there with bashful virgins for companions, they will call for abundant fruit and drink. All this shall be yours on the day of reckoning. Our gifts can have no end." So, like I said, it doesn't say 72 virgins. I don't know where that came from exactly. I'm sure that came from some tradition somewhere. But, just something to think about with this is women followers of Islam, how does that work for them? I mean, that's just something to think about. I mean, if the picture of heaven is to be with virgins and to have abundant fruit and drink, I just, that might.
Male virgins that they get, like, I don't understand where the like.
Maybe. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I just don't think usually virgins are meant. Men aren't usually called, even though they may be virgins, but they're not usually called virgins. That's usually a feminine term. But
Would that be true in Arabic tradition?
I think it is, actually, yeah. That word probably does.
I'm sure it's feminine.
Yeah.
But, I mean, but either way, I just don't know how many, maybe some guys are like, oh, yeah, it's going to be great. But I don't know how many ladies, when they hear they're going to have 72 male virgins, I don't know if that really is an exciting thing.
I thought this was the heaven for martyrs.
No. No, this is heaven for anyone. It's just, if you go to heaven, this is one of the descriptions of what it's going to be like.
So they don't have, because I thought there were different levels of paradise within Islam.
If you're a martyr, you're guaranteed going to heaven. Isn't that
Oh.
It's more guaranteed. Yeah, you're. I mean, Allah can still do what He wills,
Right.
but
Even if
you're
you're bad, right? He can still.
Allah can do. He does what He wills, but martyrdom is your guaranteed best way. And this is kind of it's not true in the sense of guaranteed heaven, but it is true that New Testament does emphasize martyrdom for Christ as a greater death. There's no doubt about that. I could show you many texts on that, but it's not guaranteed heaven like that.
I was able to sit down with your friend, he was kind of explaining a lot of this to me. He's an incredibly devout Muslim, but he's actually a Shiite. But the idea is that if you're Muslim, you follow the 5 pillars of Islam, and he was saying that all that really does, is, in a sense, is it gets Muhammad to basically vouch for you whenever you get up to God, like Allah. Because everybody has to be judged in the same line, but if you follow Islam, you follow these 5 pillars well, and Muhammad is basically letting you, not necessarily skipping the line, but getting a different one. It's like saying, I'll defend you over here. So, I don't know, is that kind of what you come across?
Yeah, and I'll get to that later because I'm going to show the text in the Quran about the judgment and he referenced it about the good deeds and the bad deeds.
So, I know that sometimes Muslims won't drink alcohol. I don't know if that's tradition or not, but in this verse it says they will call for someone to drink. Do they mean water? Do they mean alcohol?
Interesting question.
Abundant fruit and drink. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to. That's a good question. I don't know if this drink. It would depend on the Arabic word, but they're not supposed to drink alcohol. That is from the Quran. Yeah, they don't drink alcohol.
We probably just have like 5 minutes or so.
5 minutes. Okay. Well, let me keep moving then. So, one of the key things that I think, like I said, and this is something that in a loving way. Remember, we speak the truth in love. In a civil way, and not trying to do a gotcha. But this is a good thing, I think, to share. And William Lane Craig uses this in just about every debate I've seen him with Muslims. To bring up the fact that the Quran denies Jesus was crucified. This is a big deal because even atheist scholars, Robert Funk, who's the head guy of the Jesus Seminar, said that the crucifixion of Christ is the bedrock, one of the bedrocks of human history. John Dominic Crossan, Bart Ehrman said it was certain. I mean, you can't get around the fact that just about everyone says that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. I mean, this is as established fact as we can get. But the Quran denies it. It says, and for their saying, indeed, we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, the Son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, and they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but another was made to resemble him to them. And then later tradition has said that is Judas, but like it's anonymous here.
So is that implying that imposter was crucified, or that?
Yeah. And somebody else was crucified in his place, is what they would say it's Judas and tradition. I don't know when that began, but tradition says Judas. But I think another key thing as goes with that quote I showed at the beginning, Jesus, the Quran denies Jesus is the Son of God. And one of the things I would say is, going back to 1 Corinthians, the earliest books of the New Testament, Peter, Paul, James, John, Matthew, Mark, Luke, go down the list of these people. They all say Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. And they all, even if you date them in the most liberal dates, they're all writing within the 1st century. All right? All writing within the 1st century. So something I've shared with my Muslim friends is, who are you going to trust? You're going to trust James, the earliest disciples of Jesus, James, John, Peter, Paul, these people who actually were right there. You're going to trust them on who Jesus is, or 600 years later, a guy named Muhammad in a cave in Mecca. Who are you going to, when he says he's not the Son of God, who are you going to trust 600 years later? I think that's why I think it's very reasonable to think that whether Jesus was the Son of God is another issue, but the fact that he claimed to be the Son of God, I think is exactly what we get from the teaching of the New Testament.
Isn't it pretty clear that the Bible was fabricated by a lot of leaders later on, and that Muslims could make the argument, okay,
Well, I mean, and that's the point. The point about the crucifixion that I was sharing is, if that was the case, you'd think some of these skeptics, because skeptics, Bart Ehrman will question a lot, but Bart Ehrman will say that Jesus' crucifixion is certain. And a lot of these things I'm sharing about what Paul and James and these people said, Bart Ehrman also would agree completely. I've shared this before. But let me quickly close with some stuff I wanted to show you. So sharing Jesus with Muslims, there was a survey done of 750 Muslim converts to Christianity, done sometime before 2008. And they gave the top 5 reasons why they converted to Christianity. So let me just share those real quick, and I challenge you to, live that out. Number 1 was the love and lifestyle of the Christian. So someone befriending them, I don't know if you're doing stuff with international students here on campus, but you should be doing that. Befriend an international student. Befriend a Muslim. Not to manipulate, to really be their friend. Take them out to lunch. Hear their testimony. Don't debate. Just hear. Listen. Say, how'd you become a Muslim? And talk to them and listen to them and become their friend. That's a good thing. Healings and dreams. Muslims who prayed to Jesus for a healing or something, and something supernatural happened, that brought them to the faith, or Jesus appeared to them in their dreams. This is a big thing. You can go on YouTube and watch Muslim testimonies of Jesus appearing to them in their dream, and a lot of them are very similar. It's very fascinating. Another one was dissatisfaction with Islam, and one of the things they said, what were they dissatisfied about, was the lack of love and forgiveness in the Quran, and that's where this Surah 7:5-9 talks about this Judgment Day weighing the good deeds and the bad deeds. So if you have 51% bad deeds and 49% good deeds, you're going down. You're going to hell. I mean, that's how it works. And so I think this is a good thing to share, because we have something completely unique in the New Testament with the grace and the love and forgiveness of Christ through His cross. He took all of our bad deeds on Himself, so that way, and all of His good deeds covers our bad deeds. I mean, this is the gospel. And then the last 2, biblical truths and just the truth of the Word of God, reading the Bible. This surah actually, God is actually, Allah is speaking here, and He basically says to the reader of the Quran, hey, go talk to the other people of the book, the Jews and the Christians. Go read their scriptures and see if it's true. And so this is a verse from the Quran many have used to say, hey, look, this says to read the Old Testament and the New Testament, so let's do that. Your own text says to read it, so you should read it. And then lastly, and this is where I think you should go, don't try to attack Muhammad, don't try to, attack Islam, don't go that route, which a lot of these books that Christians write, it's awful. Go to Jesus, right? Go to Jesus, point to Jesus. The life and teachings of Jesus is what's changed many Muslims' life. And so get to His life, get to His deeds, get to His words, get to His death, get to His resurrection, point to Christ, live like Christ, and be like John the Baptist and say, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And I close with, the story in Acts 10 about Cornelius. He gets an angel appearing to him in his dream. He's a God-fearer. He's a Gentile. He's praying and worshiping God regularly and giving to the poor. I look at the Muslim world as like 1.5 billion Corneliuses. And if you remember the story, Peter also gets a vision and says, go to this guy Cornelius and share the gospel with him. And so I think all of us need to take that challenge. We all need to be Peters and go and share Christ with our Muslim neighbor and say, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. So let's go after the Corneliuses. That's what I had.
Well done.